of the collection that was taken up, and there is a litany or a list of different collections that were taken up at various times in the book of Acts, and these collections were taken up to relieve the needs of the saints. And some of these collections were taken up individually. For example, the earliest needs of the saints were met by individuals. Acts chapter 2, no one considered that anything that he possessed was his own. Acts chapter 4, people who had houses or lands sold them and brought the money and laid it at the feet of the apostles, to meet those particular needs. And then you have Acts 11, where Agabus prophesies concerning the dearth that would take place in Judea. And it says, every man according to his ability gave for this collection, and that collection was carried to Jerusalem and given to the elders by the hands of Paul and Barnabas. All right, and so you have a variety of collections or ways or identifications of collections, individually, collectively, that were given to relieve the needs of the saints, the physical needs of the saints. And so what Stroop is kind of, like I said last time, what he was overemphasizing was, or negating in his idea was that the elders had any real role in this. And I countered that by noting that when Robert was here and the elders and I met with Robert, that he never mentioned his elders one time. The elders at Forest Park. But we understand and we know that his elders oversee his work. Moreover, we know that every penny that we give for Robert's work that goes through the Forest Park Church is used for Robert's work. In other words, Robert has the discretion to use those funds in whatever way is best to accomplish the work that he's doing. In other words, the elders are not trying to micromanage his work from Atlanta when he's over in Fiji, 18 or 19 hours away, or however many hours away it is. It's just some crazy number because it's right on the international date line. All right, and so we understand that even though that the funds that we provide go through the church at Forest Park, that Robert still has the discretion to use those funds in the work that he's carrying out. It's not one bit different than if we sent the money directly to Robert. I mean, we could send the money directly to Robert if we so chose to do that. And either way would be fine. We send it through the Forest Park Church because that church has oversight of that work. And, and in my opinion, and I think I can produce some Bible for it, that, that we need to be accountable to somebody. Now, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those things in the Sunday night session. But you find that the collections were taken up. Now, bottom of page 155. Whether these funds were, and I like this, after all the things that he says, and he comes back and says this, whether these funds were received by the elders at Jerusalem and distributed to the poor by them or not matters little. We know that help was sent earlier from Antioch, was received by the elders, and used as the occasion demanded. But the important thing to remember that in every case, Christians, whether members of the same congregation or different congregations, were ministering to the needs of Christians and made use of such arrangements as would suit or serve their purpose. This was not a matter of a church or churches helping a church. It was saints ministering to saints. In other words, the idea is, or has been set forth, that somehow there's a difference in all of us individually as a group, and then somehow the Burleson Church. You see what I'm saying? There's no distinction between every one of us individually as Christians at this place and the Burleson Church. And to make a distinction, is to make one where the Bible does not make one. I mean, again, going all the way back to the beginning. What is the church if it's not the people? And every work of the church is done by the members. You know, this church does not do anything apart from its members. Is that right? In other words, there's not some organizational structure that does certain things that none of us do or are capable of doing, or that we don't do ourselves. And so that's the point that he's trying to make. Paul said, the quote there from Romans 15, I go to Jerusalem ministering to the saints. And so, which I find is an interesting thought, because those that hold the view that you can't send money from one church to another in matters of evangelism, permit you to send money to churches from one church to another in a matter of benevolence, and yet Paul makes no distinction. Paul makes no distinction whatsoever. He said, I'm ministering to the saints. I've gathered up a collection to minister to the saints. Well, those are the individual Christians. And so I think they're trying to prove, I think those on the other side try to prove too much with that matter, given how many times Paul talks about saints ministering to saints and not churches ministering to churches. There is no difference between those two things. All right? Then down, just to skip through the written text of 2 Corinthians 8, about halfway down in the middle of the page, you see the phrase, it is clear. Okay? It is clear that each of these cases was a cooperative effort of individual Christians, whether in the same congregation or in different congregations, to minister to the needs of Christians in Jerusalem. The decisions to help these brethren who were in need in Jerusalem in both of these cases were made by the individual Christians. And it was up to them individually whether or not they would give and how much. There is no indication of an organizational or elder's decision in the matter. In other words, when the needs arose, each individual Christian or family gave as they were willing and had the ability, and that nobody, there was no overarching eldership or organization that dictated to them if they would give, how they would give, or how much they would give. It was all a matter of the individuals. All right? And so then look, keep reading. It says, this does not imply that the elders did not have their influence in the work, but rather to stress the fact that it was a cooperational effort among Christians in the hope that we would more fully understand that the work of the church is the work of Christians. That the church, whether we are speaking locally or universally, is a body of Christians and nothing more. And that there is no limitation upon the work of the church that does not apply to the work of an individual Christian. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Keep going. What an individual can do as a Christian work may be done by any number of Christians, whether or not they worship in the same location or several locations. The idea that a Christian may do a Christian work that several Christians or that an assembly of Christians, a church, may not do is without scriptural foundation. And the idea that a Christian as an individual, or the idea that a Christian as an individual may employ a method or means in accomplishing a Christian work that would be wrong if used by a church is likewise unfounded. In other words, whatever the Christian can do to do a Christian work, the church collectively can also do that same thing. Does that make sense? Now, Sean?
I'm just going to say the authority comes from the same place.
The authority comes from the same place. That's right.
Given to the individual or the body.
Yeah, the authority is given to the individuals and the body. And for example, now, I spent a lot of time thinking. I talked with Bill about this for a long time, and I would not, just for the sake of appearance, would not propose that you could do it. But did the early church sell things that they owned to meet the needs that arose from time to time?
Yes.
Now, when I say the early church, am I talking about the Burleson Church of Christ, or am I talking about the individuals of the Burleson Church of Christ? Or the Jerusalem Church of Christ? Am I talking about the Jerusalem Church as a corporate entity, or am I talking about the individual members of the Jerusalem Church? The individual members of the Jerusalem Church sold items individually at their own discretion, all right, to meet the needs that arose from time to time. When they sold things to meet the needs of the church, were they obligated to give everything that they received?
No.
Why? How do we know that? That's right, Ananias and Sapphira. They sold a piece of land, and the Bible says they kept back part of it. Now, the sin was not in keeping back part of it. It was lying about what they had received in comparison to what they gave. I mean, did not Peter say, when it was yours, was it not your own? And after you sold it, was not the money, in essence, I'm paraphrasing, was not the money you received still yours to do with as you please? Is that right? All right, so individual Christians have the liberty to sell things to meet church needs and give whatever they want to give to meet that need. So if there was a need, let's just say something bad happened in the area. Something bad happened. Let's say we had a tornado. That's pretty easy to figure out or imagine. Could we say, all right, we've got a need here for the church, and we've got a need here for the church in Hamilton that we need to meet. All right? But what we have on hand is not sufficient. To meet that need. Could they say, we're gonna ask everyone to consider selling some things or having a yard sale to help, or whatever you want to do. Could we do that?
Yeah.
Would you be obligated to do it? No. Now, let me ask you this, because here's where it made me bad uncomfortable. Could we say that there's a great need that needs to be met, and in order to do the very best that we possibly can, we're all going to meet at the same place. Anybody that wants to can meet at the same place, whether it be this parking lot or some prominent place in town, and have a yard sale there. And everybody take their stuff to the same place at the same time. Could you do that?
You probably get stoned for it.
Yeah, you could, but you'd probably get stoned for it. Now the purpose of the sale is not the point. Let me put it this way. If you did that, you wouldn't advertise the purpose of the event. You just had it. See what I'm saying? You just had it. And then that way, everybody that participates is still completely autonomous to bring what they want, sell what they want, give what they want. Right? I mean, I can take my stuff and sell all of it and not give anything, right? That wouldn't be a very good reflection on me, but I'd be at liberty to do that, right? I mean, I'd be at liberty to do that.
Some things you can't help pay with.
Well, and that kind of goes along. with that thought. But again, I'm not saying we should do it. What I am saying is, could we do it? And I think the answer is yes. But like Kyle said, you'd get stoned for doing it. That they'd levy you every which way under the sun, and people would hold you in suspicion if you did something like that. But the point still remains. If a Christian can do a thing individually, then a group of Christians can do that thing, and all the Christians in a local church can do that thing, so long as the matter is not enjoined on the individual and the oversight still remains with the individual. Does that make sense? Go ahead, Kyle.
Well, I think a lot of it is the need that comes by that. If there was something that happened that we financially couldn't support, we were in our, even with what money we have, we couldn't help. If it was that bad where it come to we need to sell our own property or something, I don't think people would truly have a problem with it. I think they have a problem with what happens when you see people who just don't want to give, so they have a yard sale or they sell their junk, to donate to something, or sell raffle tickets or something
Right.
like that. And I think that's where the problem comes, because the church in Jerusalem had a serious need.
That's right. And it couldn't
people
be met.
No, there's no way the people that was in Jerusalem could feed everybody and everybody. They had to sell in order to accommodate everybody.
Right.
When you have that need, I don't think it would be that kind of a problem if there was that kind of need. But you don't see that anymore.
Where we live.
Right here, yes.
Where we live, where you have first of all abundant resources, including what most of us take for granted that the vast majority of the rest of the world does not have, and that's insurance.
That's what I was fixing to say.
Insurance. If you're in Ghana, like a friend of mine had a school in Ghana, and it was not constructed properly, and it was a 2-story concrete structure, and during a really heavy rain 2 or 3 years ago, that thing collapsed. Now, fortunately, the school was out when it happened. Guess what? His school's just, junk. You don't have any recourse against the builder, and you don't have any insurance. So there are a lot of things that we take for granted, where we are because of our resources and the society in which we live, but the vast majority of the rest of the world doesn't function under, for example, in St. Louis in the early 90s, and then it's been even since then, they had massive flooding in St. Louis, and a lot of people lost their homes. Their homes washed away, the foundations were ruined or whatever. The vast majority of those people have insurance. But what about the temporary? There was a massive temporary need, right? Now, and I can remember, a lot of the congregations. In fact, the church in Arnold was a centralized location for distribution of needs. Of supplies to meet immediate needs. Right? So sometimes you can have some real immediate needs that might require you to do something like that. And so there's going to be insurance, but who knows when it's going to come. In the meantime, that person still has to eat. They still need clothes. They still need shelter. And so when an occasion like that arises, then the individual Christian or congregations are at liberty to do what it takes to meet that need. As long as it doesn't violate, obviously you don't sell raffle tickets to raise money to help flood the but you understand what I'm saying. It doesn't happen a lot in the sense of a long term, but there are a lot of times there's a lot of short term needs that have to be met. And so he makes the idea, and I'm going to read it again. The idea that a Christian may do a Christian work that several Christians or an assembly of Christians, that is a church, may not do is without scriptural foundation. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those things as we go forward. All right, now over on the page 158. first full sentence there says, now this is, now he's entering in, let me just kind of preface this. He's entering into the saints only aspect. He's entering into the saints only aspect of this thinking. The previous page, bottom page 157 says, it should be observed further that there is no indication that such help should be restricted to church members or church families. Again, now we're talking about the saints only doctrine. Now, and here's a good point. It is unlikely that the Christians of the first century were able, in most localities, of doing more than taking care of their own. In other words, their ability was probably confined to helping their own the best that they can. But Paul's instruction to the Galatians leaves no doubt that they were to manifest the Spirit of Christ insofar as their means permitted. In Galatians 6:10, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good toward who? All men, but especially those of the household of the faith. So, in other words, there's a ranking or an order, isn't there? There's a ranking or an order there. Who's first?
Christian.
Brethren are first. Christians are first. But that does not mean that non-Christians are excluded. If the needs of the saints are met, I mean, think about this. Let me do this. Just from a practical standpoint, common sense. And I've seen this happen. First of all, there's a biblical precedent. When the people brought in Exodus, when they brought the gold for the preparations of the tabernacle, the Bible says they had to be restrained from giving, because what they had given was sufficient and too much. And too much. Right? Now, in other words, they gave more than the need. Right? Several times on my trips to Africa, people wanted to make a contribution to that trip. Now, let's just say that my trip was going to cost $3,000. Airfare and all that. There were a lot of times where I collected, people just sent money. I gathered up $4,500, $5,000. And in every case, I would ask, I say, now look, I'm pretty close to having all I need, or I have all I need. You know what? And I said, if I have too much money, what do you want me to do with this? They said, use it over there in whatever way you see fit. In other words, if all the basic needs of your trip are met, help somebody. Help somebody. All right? So, what would happen if there was, again, let's just talk about Hackleburg tornado. What if the Hackleburg church needed $1 million to meet the needs of the church and the building and the brethren in the area? And $2 million was collected and sent to the Hackleburg church. And they met all the needs of all the brethren with $1 million, and now they're sitting on $1 million. What are they supposed to do with that?
Distributed people don't need.
But if you hold the saints only view, if you hold the saints only view, what are you going to do with that money? Huh? Where's the authority for that? I mean, I know you're speculating, man. I know you, but you see the point. You see the problem.
Well, just think.
Can you imagine a church having $1 million and half the town's been destroyed, and the church has all the needs of the saints met, and they have $1 million, and they say, "Sorry, we can't help you."
That's what I was figuring.
We can't help you. Now, if we had to cash this check and put it in the church treasury, we probably could have helped you. But because it went into the bank account, now we can't help you. You see the problem there? I mean, what do you do? What do you do with that money? Do you go back and find every single one of your contributors and give them back money based on the percentage of? You go back and issue a bunch of refunds, but based on how much each person gave. See, there's a lot of problems with this saints only problem, or this saints only issue, because you get to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and Paul said, what that very thing happened. The money that was sent to the church met the needs of the saints, and when that need was met, you know what they did? They helped other people. They helped other people. 2 Corinthians 9, 12 to 14. All right, next week we're going to talk about cooperation in preaching of the gospel. All right, that'll start middle of page 158.